A quiet night shift for Officer Daniel was about to change in the most unexpected way. As he made his usual rounds through the suburban streets, a faint sound caught his attention. A tiny, determined German Shepherd puppy no older than a few weeks appeared out of the shadows. With intelligent eyes and a sense of urgency, the puppy seemed to have one goal: to lead Daniel somewhere. What could a small puppy possibly want from a seasoned officer? As the pup's barks echoed through the night, Daniel followed, unaware of the emotional journey that lay ahead. What did the puppy want to show him? Watch the full story to uncover the incredible bond that was about to unfold. Officer Daniel had been on the force for over a decade. His uniform was well worn, the badge polished with pride, but sometimes the job felt a bit too familiar, too quiet. The constant hum of the radio and the slow ticking of the clock had become part of his routine. He was used to the quiet streets of the suburban town he patrolled, where things rarely got out of hand. The nights were often uneventful, and on nights like this he found himself wishing for the kind of excitement that only came with a real challenge. It had been another long evening. The streetlights flickered softly in the distance, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalks. Daniel's boots clicked against the pavement as he finished his patrol route. He glanced at his watch, noting that his shift would end soon. It had been a calm night. No sirens, no calls for backup. Just the kind of peace officers secretly hope for but rarely get. He breathed a sigh of relief, knowing he could soon head home, kick off his boots, and finally get some rest. Daniel turned the corner, making his way back toward his patrol car parked on the side of the quiet street. His mind wandered to thoughts of dinner and the warmth of his apartment, where he could relax for a few hours before starting another day. The soft glow of the streetlights lit the way, and the world seemed still untouched by any sense of urgency. Just as he reached for the door handle of his car, a faint scuffling sound caught his attention. His hand froze mid-motion. At first, he thought it was just a stray cat or the wind knocking something over, but the sound persisted, growing slightly louder, as if something or someone was approaching. Daniel paused, narrowing his eyes, his senses immediately alert. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and something in the air made him pause. He turned his head toward the noise, scanning the darkened street ahead of him. And then, from the shadows, he saw it. A small figure emerged into the dim light, something low to the ground, moving with a slight stumble. It was a puppy. A German Shepherd puppy, not much older than a few weeks, with floppy ears and bright, intelligent eyes. Its tiny body moved with purpose, dragging its paws across the gravel as if it had somewhere it needed to go. Daniel stopped in his tracks, surprised by the sight. Puppies weren't a common sight in these parts, especially not wandering alone. He crouched slightly, his hand instinctively brushing the radio clip to his chest. "Hey, little guy," he murmured softly, trying to coax the pup toward him. But to his surprise, the puppy didn't run off as most stray animals would. Instead, it waddled directly toward him. The puppy stopped just inches away from his boots and looked up at him with wide, pleading eyes. Daniel could almost feel the weight of its gaze. It wasn't the usual fearful look of a stray dog trying to avoid humans. No, this look was different. It was almost purposeful. The puppy let out a soft whimper, a sound so faint it was barely audible, but enough to stir something in Daniel's chest. As he reached down ready to help the little creature, the puppy spun around quickly and trotted away. It paused just a few steps ahead, glancing back as if to ensure Daniel was following. Daniel blinked in surprise. "What are you trying to do, huh? Lead me somewhere." He chuckled under his breath, unsure whether to be amused or concerned. He stood up, half expecting the puppy to lose interest and wander off, but it didn't. Instead, the puppy barked, a sharp, tiny yelp that echoed louder than it should have in the quiet street. Then it trotted forward again, looking back at Daniel with urgency. This wasn't a random stray searching for food or comfort. The puppy had a purpose. Daniel's brow furrowed as he watched the tiny creature lead him further down the street. Something about this situation felt off, and yet he couldn't bring himself to walk away. He had a feeling, one he couldn't quite place, that this little puppy needed him. And so, without quite knowing why, he followed. Daniel watched as the tiny German Shepherd puppy stood just inches from his boots, its bright, intelligent eyes locking with his. The puppy's fur was thick and soft, a warm mixture of gold and black that shimmered in the dim streetlight. Its small frame was trembling slightly, yet there was a calm resolve in the way it gazed up at him, as if the puppy had a purpose far beyond its size. Daniel's instincts told him to approach and comfort the creature, but as his hand moved toward it, the puppy did something unexpected. With a sudden twist, it turned and dashed a few steps ahead. It stopped, glanced back over its shoulder, and then let out another sharp bark, urging him to follow. The urgency in its eyes was undeniable. This wasn't a lost puppy looking for attention or food. No, there was something else. Okay, Daniel muttered to himself, watching as the small dog kept looking back, waiting for him to follow. He hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity got the better of him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary situation. The puppy wasn't just wandering aimlessly, it was leading him somewhere. The little dog's determination was clear in every step it took. Each time Daniel hesitated or slowed, the puppy would stop, turn around, and give him a pointed bark, urging him to catch up. Its small legs moved quickly, but the puppy never strayed too far ahead. It was as though it understood that Daniel was needed, and it wasn't going to let him go. The light from the street lamps cast long shadows as the two of them moved through the quiet streets, the puppy trotting along its tail, stiff with purpose. Daniel's footsteps quickened to match the pace of the puppy, though part of him was still unsure of what was going on. There was a sense of unsettling urgency in the air. He had seen stray animals before. Pets lost or scared, running around looking for food or comfort. But this felt different. The puppy didn't flinch when Daniel stepped closer. Instead, it stayed at the edge of his path, looking up at him with those wide, focused eyes. There was an intelligence there that shouldn't belong to a puppy so young. Daniel couldn't explain why, but it felt as though the puppy knew exactly what it was doing. The small creature wasn't just wandering, it was guiding him. His pulse quickened as he followed the puppy down the empty road. The street was eerily silent, and there was a strange sense of isolation that filled the air. Daniel's senses, finely honed from years on the job, began to tingle with unease. Something about this situation didn't sit right. Why was this puppy so persistent? Why was it leading him into unfamiliar territory? But despite the discomfort gnawing at his gut, Daniel couldn't bring himself to turn away. The puppy was showing him something important, and deep down he felt the compelling need to follow, as if the dog had a message for him that only he could understand. The puppy trotted confidently ahead, its little body moving through the darkness like a beacon of light, guiding him without hesitation. It didn't seem scared despite the dark and quiet streets surrounding them. There was a purpose in its steps, a certainty in its path. Daniel's thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Could this be a coincidence? A lost puppy? Or was there something more at play here? The further they went, the stronger his sense of unease grew. The puppy wasn't leading him to a familiar place. It wasn't wandering to a park or street corner for safety. No, it was taking him deeper down a narrow road he rarely patrolled. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the puppy wasn't just lost. It had a clear mission. As he followed, each bark, each glance back reminded him of how much this little dog needed him. And though the path seemed uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't stop now. Daniel's footsteps grew heavier as he followed the puppy, whose small, determined figure continued to lead the way. The streets around them grew darker, quieter, as if the world had closed in. His instincts, always sharp from years of patrols, screamed at him that something was wrong. This wasn't just an ordinary night. The puppy's behavior wasn't like any stray animal Daniel had encountered before. It wasn't scared or anxious like most lost dogs. Instead, the puppy was focused, moving with intent, as if it had somewhere specific to go. Daniel couldn't understand why a young puppy would be so sure of its path, nor why it was leading him deeper into a part of the town he rarely patrolled. His mind raced through scenarios. Was it lost, or was it trying to find help for something? But none of the answers seemed to fit. Something in his gut told him that this wasn't an accident. The puppy's tiny body moved quickly, its paws padding against the asphalt, leaving small, almost imperceptible marks on the quiet street. Its gaze remained unwavering. Each time Daniel slowed or paused, the puppy would glance back over its shoulder, waiting for him to catch up, its eyes sharp and full of urgency. It was as though the dog knew exactly what it was doing and was determined to make sure Daniel followed. Daniel's unease only deepened. This wasn't a casual walk. The puppy wasn't leading him to a familiar place, a street corner, a park, or even the local diner. No, it was guiding him down narrower streets now. And the further they went, the more Daniel felt the weight of the night pressing in on him. The lights on the street began to fade, and the shadows grew longer, stretching across the sidewalk like dark fingers pulling him further into the unknown. A chill ran through his spine. The silence was unnerving, not a sound in the air except for the faint sound of the puppy's paws against the ground, and his own footsteps now louder as his pace quickened. There was no wind, no distant noise, just an eerie quiet that seemed to stretch on forever. It felt as if the world was holding its breath. As they moved deeper into the night, Daniel's sense of discomfort grew. The puppy wasn't heading toward any familiar landmarks. There was no food, no signs of a home, no indication that the dog had any idea of where it was going, except that it had a clear destination in mind. Daniel paused for a moment, watching as the puppy trotted ahead again, unwavering, its tiny tail held high and its ears perked as if it could sense something ahead that Daniel couldn't. Daniel's heart began to pound. Why was it so sure of where it was going? He had been in situations like this before, facing unpredictability and discomfort, but this was different. This wasn't a random walk. The puppy had purpose, and that purpose was pulling him into something unknown. He couldn't explain it, but Daniel felt a compelling pull to follow the dog to find out what it was leading him toward. His thoughts flashed back to the strange urgency in the puppy's eyes when it had first looked up at him. It wasn't asking for food. It wasn't lost. It was leading him somewhere important. Daniel shook his head, pushing aside the unease that threatened to overwhelm him. "All right, buddy," he muttered, swallowing his doubts. "Show me what you need." With a determined nod, Daniel took another step, following the puppy as it trotted ahead, its small body disappearing into the darkened street, leading him further away from the familiar roads and into the unknown. The night seemed to stretch endlessly as Daniel followed the little puppy down a narrow path. The streetlights were behind him now, their pale light fading as they left the comfort of the familiar and stepped into the unknown. The cool night air wrapped around him thick and heavy, and as they moved further, the sound of their footsteps grew softer, drowned by the deep silence that enveloped the street. Ahead, the puppy's small form trotted confidently, its movements purposeful, guiding Daniel deeper into the shadows. Daniel's eyes narrowed, and he felt a knot of tension tighten in his chest. He had been a cop for many years, and his instincts were honed to detect danger. The feeling of unease that settled over him now was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just the darkened streets or the unfamiliarity of the route. It was the oppressive silence around them. He could feel the cold breath of the wind, sharp and biting against his skin. It whistled softly through the trees, its chill cutting through his uniform, raising goosebumps on his arms. The wind seemed to whisper as it passed, swirling around him, but the rest of the world remained still. It was as though the entire environment was holding its breath. The forest ahead was thick with darkness, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their branches stretched high, tangled together in an eerie embrace. The road grew more narrow, almost swallowed by the towering trees as they crept in from both sides. As Daniel's boots crunched softly on the gravel, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer walking on a road. He was venturing into uncharted territory, and the forest around him felt like a vast, consuming void. The moonlight barely pierced through the canopy, casting long shadows across the uneven path. He instinctively checked his flashlight, making sure it was within reach, but the light barely offered comfort in this thick darkness. The puppy, undeterred by the growing tension, continued to move ahead, its tiny tail wagging with purpose. Daniel quickened his pace to match its strides, but the closer they got to the woods, the more intense the silence became. It wasn't the typical quiet of nature. It was unnatural, almost suffocating. The absence of the usual sounds, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of insects, was unsettling. All that remained was the soft rustle of Daniel's footsteps and the steady patter of the puppy's paws, a rhythm that seemed to resonate deeply in the otherwise still night. As they entered the forest's edge, the trees seemed to close in on them. The air grew heavier, the path more overgrown, and the shadows deepened. Daniel's senses, already on high alert, picked up on every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig beneath their feet. There was a tingling sensation on the back of his neck, a warning of something unseen waiting in the dark. He couldn't ignore the way the wind began to pick up again, its icy fingers brushing against him as it whispered through the branches, pulling him deeper into the woods. The puppy did not slow down. It continued to move ahead, its tiny legs pushing through the underbrush, seemingly unfazed by the growing darkness. Its focus was unwavering as it led Daniel deeper into the forest, its tiny body cutting through the night with precision. The closer they got, the more Daniel's thoughts raced. What was it leading him to? And why had it been so persistent from the start? The path ahead seemed to narrow further, with dense thickets and tangled roots threatening to trip him up. Daniel couldn't help but feel that they were crossing a threshold, and whatever waited beyond it, it wasn't something he was prepared for. Yet despite the growing discomfort in his chest, he couldn't stop. There was something about the puppy's determination, its drive to guide him forward, that kept him moving. Suddenly, just as he was about to ask himself if he should turn back, the puppy let out a sharp bark louder than any sound it had made so far. It stopped and turned, looking up at him with wide, urgent eyes. For the first time, Daniel felt a sense of urgency, as if time was running out, as if they were approaching something significant, something he had to witness, something he couldn't turn away from. As Daniel's boots crunched through the damp leaves, the path ahead seemed to grow more treacherous with each step. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the soft patter of the puppy's feet. It trotted confidently ahead, still unwavering in its mission, guiding Daniel further into the dense forest. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches reaching overhead, blocking out the moonlight and leaving only shadows in their wake. Suddenly, just as Daniel was about to ask himself how much further they had to go, the puppy let out a sharp, insistent bark, its voice piercing the quiet night. It stopped abruptly and turned around, locking eyes with Daniel, its gaze filled with a level of urgency he hadn't seen before. The little creature stood still for a moment, its body tense, as if it were waiting for something, waiting for Daniel to realize that something was coming. Daniel froze, his heart racing. His instinct screamed that something was wrong, something was about to happen. Just as he took a cautious step forward, a soft, weak whimper echoed from deep within the woods. The sound was so faint at first he thought it might be his imagination, but then it came again, clearer, closer, and this time Daniel's pulse quickened. The noise didn't belong to any animal he had encountered before. It was a low, pitiful cry, the kind that suggested pain, distress, and desperation. His breath caught in his throat. Daniel's eyes darted around the shadowy forest, scanning for the source of the sound. It didn't seem like an ordinary animal's cry. This was something far more unsettling, far more human-like. His heart pounded as he stood motionless for a moment, listening intently. The whimper came again, softer now, but unmistakably close. The puppy, now standing at attention, let out another sharp bark, its body quivering slightly as it stared into the woods, determined to move forward. It seemed to understand that the source of the sound was nearby, and with each yelp it gave, Daniel could feel the urgency building within him. A feeling of dread settled over him, his mind racing with possibilities. What could be causing that sound? It was a cry of pain. But who or what was in such distress? Daniel's thoughts were interrupted when the puppy darted forward, its tiny legs moving with a precision that seemed beyond its size. It led him deeper into the trees, past twisted branches and over roots that seemed to rise from the earth like the fingers of the forest itself. Every step Daniel took felt heavier, now the air growing colder as they ventured further into the woods. His senses were heightened, his every nerve on edge. The silence of the forest was almost deafening now, with only the sounds of the puppy's paws against the earth and his own breathing filling the void. Then, as they pushed through a particularly thick cluster of trees, the whimpering sound grew louder, closer. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he pushed forward, his flashlight sweeping over the ground ahead. Through the darkness, he could make out a shape, something large and dark, barely visible through the undergrowth. The puppy barked again, its body tense, urging Daniel onward. Just as Daniel stepped forward, his flashlight illuminated the scene. He froze, a chill running through his veins as his light fell upon the source of the whimpering. Daniel's flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness, and as he stepped closer, the source of the whimpering came into view. His breath caught in his throat. Beneath a pile of tangled branches barely visible lay a German shepherd, a large, imposing figure, though now weakened and vulnerable. Her fur was matted dirt smeared across her body, and she was struggling to breathe, every shallow inhalation a painful reminder of her dire condition. The whimpering that had led him here came from her, a sound filled with pain and desperation. The light from Daniel's flashlight illuminated her face, and for a moment he froze. The mother dog's eyes were glassy, but she was aware. She lifted her head slightly weakly, but there was no mistaking the silent plea in her gaze. It was clear that she had been here for a long time, her body exhausted from the struggle to survive. The puppy, now at Daniel's side, immediately rushed to the injured dog, circling her and pawing desperately at her, as though trying to will her back to life. Daniel's heart clenched at the sight. The small dog seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, its tiny body trembling as it nuzzled its mother, licking her face, unwilling to leave her side. Daniel's chest tightened with emotion as he stepped closer, his flashlight shaking slightly in his grip. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The mother dog was gravely injured, trapped beneath the heavy branches, unable to free herself. There was no question that time was running out for her. Daniel could hear her labored breaths, each one more shallow than the last. He knelt down beside her, his hands shaking as he gently touched her fur. She winced at his touch, her eyes locking onto his, and for a brief moment Daniel could feel the unspoken bond between them. It was as if she knew that he was there to help, that he was her last chance. A surge of determination washed over him. This wasn't just another rescue mission, it was something deeper, more personal. The urgency in the puppy's behavior, its refusal to leave the mother's side, was clear. This was not a random encounter. The bond between them was undeniable. Daniel swallowed hard, his mind racing with the realities of the situation. He knew this would not be easy. The branches that trapped the mother dog were heavy, and there was a real chance that she might not survive long enough to be freed. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, Daniel made his decision. With a deep breath, he began to move the branches, working quickly but carefully, knowing that every second counted. The puppy, still by his side, let out another soft bark, its eyes filled with pleading. Daniel could feel its desperation just as strong as his own. He focused on the task at hand, not allowing the gravity of the situation to overwhelm him. He had been in tight spots before, but something about this helpless mother and her devoted puppy struck him in a way he couldn't explain. He couldn't walk away from this. He wouldn't. Daniel's hands moved quickly but carefully as he worked to clear the debris trapping the mother dog. The branches that lay across her were thick, tangled with sharp, twisting roots that seemed to cling to the earth as though they knew they were keeping her from freedom. His fingers ached from the effort, and the weight of the branches felt heavier with each second that passed. Time was slipping away. He could feel it, his own body growing tired as the minutes dragged on. The cool, damp air in the forest, once refreshing, now felt heavy, pressing in on him. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he struggled to move the larger branches, trying to find a way to lift them without hurting the injured dog further. Each branch he pulled felt like an obstacle, but he couldn't stop, not now. The puppy stood close by, eyes wide with urgency, watching him as if it knew exactly what was at stake. It barked again, its tiny voice filled with desperation, as if trying to encourage him, urging him to hurry. Daniel's heart clenched at the sight. This little dog depended on him, and there was no way he was giving up now. With every move, Daniel felt the increasing weight of the moment. His arms trembled from the effort, and the branches seemed to grow more entangled, harder to break free. The forest around him seemed to press in its silence, becoming suffocating. He could feel his heartbeat pounding in his chest as the minutes continued to tick by, each one stretching longer than the last. Suddenly, the wind picked up the trees above him, swaying with a force that seemed to match his growing desperation. The gusts of wind howled through the branches, whipping his face and making the already challenging task even harder. Daniel squinted into the night, the wind biting at his exposed skin, but he refused to stop. The gusts howled louder, and the cold air felt like it was pushing him backward, adding a layer of frustration to his already fragile focus. The sharp branches scraped against his skin, and the wind added to the chaos, whipping around him like an invisible force. But still he pressed on. The mother dog was still breathing, though her chest rose and fell with increasing difficulty. He couldn't afford to lose focus, to let the elements discourage him. With a deep breath, Daniel paused for a moment. He glanced at the puppy still waiting anxiously by his side. The little dog's eyes were filled with a mix of fear and hope, its body shivering slightly in the cold. But it was determined, just like Daniel. The puppy wasn't giving up. Neither could he. In a moment of renewed determination, Daniel shifted his weight and began carefully lifting another branch, his muscles aching with every movement. The wind continued to blow through the trees, but Daniel ignored it. He could do this. He had to do this. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last of the branches was pushed aside, revealing the mother dog, weak and exhausted, but still alive. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He knelt beside her, gently brushing his hand over her fur, making sure not to startle her. Her eyes fluttered slightly, and Daniel's heart raced with a surge of relief. He had done it. He had freed her. But there was no time to celebrate. The clock was still ticking, and the puppy's presence, like a constant reminder, urged him to act quickly. Daniel needed to get her to safety. Now. Daniel's mind raced as he crouched next to the injured mother dog, his heart pounding in his chest. Her breathing was shallow, each breath rattling painfully in her chest, and her body was weak and frail, barely holding on. The fight for survival was evident in the way her eyes flickered with faint hope every time they met his. But the clock was ticking. Every second felt like an eternity, and Daniel knew that the window for saving her was rapidly closing. He glanced over at the puppy, who had remained by his side throughout the ordeal. Its tiny body was trembling, but its eyes were full of determination, urging him to act faster to save its mother. The little dog was a symbol of hope, but Daniel could feel the weight of its silent plea. Time was the enemy now, and it was slipping away. Daniel swallowed hard and focused. He had been trained for high-pressure situations, but this was different. He wasn't just responding to an emergency call. This was a life-or-death situation, and the stakes were personal. He had to keep calm. He had to think clearly. His years of experience as an officer had taught him how to make decisions in moments of crisis, but this felt different. The emotional weight of the puppy's silent calls for help made his heart heavy, and he had to fight the overwhelming feeling of desperation that threatened to overtake him. Taking a deep breath, Daniel assessed the situation. The mother dog was still trapped beneath a cluster of thick branches, but now that he had cleared most of them, he needed to lift her gently and get her to safety. The wound on her side was still bleeding slightly, and her ribs appeared to be cracked, adding to the urgency of the situation. The last thing he needed was for her to move or resist, so he needed to be gentle but swift. He slipped his arms carefully beneath her body, making sure not to cause further injury. The mother dog flinched slightly as he touched her body weakly responding, but she didn't pull away. He breathed a sigh of relief at the small victory. At least she wasn't in immediate shock, but he knew that wouldn't last long. He needed to move her quickly. Daniel adjusted his hold, feeling the weight of her body in his arms. The wind began to pick up again, a cold gust pushing through the trees, but he couldn't afford to be distracted. He knew this would be the hardest part, the part where he had to carry her out of the forest, and with each step he could feel the ticking of the clock in his mind. The forest felt even darker now, as if the very trees were pressing in, urging him to hurry. But every step was a battle. The wind howled louder, the trees swaying as if mocking his struggle. His muscles screamed from the effort, and he could feel the weight of the mother dog becoming unbearable. Every step felt heavier than the last, and the distance back to his car seemed to stretch longer with each passing second. He glanced down at the puppy, who was still close by, but its tiny body was shaking, its eyes filled with fear and hope. The little dog wasn't going to leave its mother. That much was clear. And Daniel wasn't going to give up either, not when there was still a chance. But with each step, his heart sank a little more. The mother dog's breathing was slowing down. Her once steady breaths were now rapid and shallow, as though she was struggling to hold on. Daniel's throat tightened. The thought of losing her, of failing this little creature, filled him with a deep sense of failure. He was fighting time, and the feeling of desperation grew stronger with every labored breath from the dog. The wind howled through the trees, pushing against Daniel with an almost malicious force as he struggled forward. The mother dog's breathing grew increasingly erratic, each shallow gasp a sharp reminder of the limited time they had left. Her body, once strong and proud, now felt fragile and heavy in Daniel's arms. Her breaths rattled in her chest, her body trembling beneath his touch. With each step, Daniel could feel her weight becoming more unbearable, and the ground beneath him seemed to stretch farther than before. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, his breaths coming in heavy, labored gasps. The thought of losing her, of failing this helpless creature and the puppy, gnawed at his insides. He couldn't afford to slow down, not when every second mattered. He glanced down at the puppy, who was trotting alongside him, its tiny body still shaking with fear, but its eyes bright with unwavering determination. It was clear the puppy wasn't going to leave its mother, not now, not ever, and neither would Daniel. But with each labored breath from the mother dog, Daniel felt his hope begin to flicker. Her breathing was slowing, becoming more irregular. The fight to hold on was evident in the way her chest rose and fell with increasing difficulty. Daniel could feel a sense of impending loss creeping in, the quiet terror of knowing that time was slipping away faster than he could move. "Come on," Daniel muttered to himself, his voice raw. He could feel his own body growing weaker, but he refused to stop. He couldn't not when they were so close. Every step forward was an effort, but every second felt like it counted for more than the last. The mother dog's soft whimpering only spurred him on, urging him to keep going. The closer they got to the edge of the woods, the more Daniel felt the weight of the situation bear down on him. He was fighting against time itself. The forest felt as if it was pressing in on them, the trees closing in like dark sentinels, their branches swaying ominously in the wind. The path was growing more difficult, with roots twisting upward, threatening to trip him, and thick underbrush slowing his progress. Yet Daniel pressed on each step, forcing him further through the night, his mind focused on one thing: getting the mother dog to safety. His instincts were on high alert, but there was a growing fear deep within him, a fear that despite his best efforts, he might not make it in time. The thought of failing both the mother dog and the puppy was overwhelming, but he had no choice. He couldn't let go. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. The wind picked up again, the gusts strong and biting, but Daniel didn't let it distract him. He kept moving, his muscles screaming in protest. The mother dog's breathing had become even more shallow, the rising and falling of her chest growing weaker with every step. He couldn't wait any longer. As the path began to clear, Daniel could see the edge of the forest just ahead. The distant lights of his patrol car flickered in the distance, and with that a renewed sense of urgency filled his chest. They were close, so close. But even with the safety of the car in sight, Daniel knew there was still so much to do. The wind howled relentlessly, each gust carrying a bitter cold that cut through Daniel's jacket, but he didn't flinch. His body was worn from hours of physical strain, but his resolve had never been stronger. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, and yet Daniel couldn't stop. The mother dog's breaths were now ragged, the rise and fall of her chest becoming more erratic with each passing moment. The sense of urgency gripped him tighter, squeezing his chest until he could barely breathe. The path ahead was almost clear, the trees thinning out, but Daniel's heart was still heavy with the task at hand. The weight of the branches trapping the mother dog remained in his mind. He couldn't leave her here. He couldn't fail now, not when they were so close. As Daniel approached the spot where the mother dog had been pinned, his breath visible in the cold air, he knelt down to get a better look at the situation. The pile of branches was dense and thick, twisted tightly around her body, and though he had already cleared a portion of them, there were still large, heavy limbs that needed to be moved. He reached for the nearest branch, bracing himself as he grabbed hold. The wood groaned under his weight, and for a moment he thought it wouldn't budge. But with a forceful tug, he managed to shift it just enough to free a portion of her body. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, his hands trembling as he worked quickly to push aside another large branch. It was a battle of strength versus time, and every second felt like a precious commodity slipping away. Her breathing was growing weaker, each gasp more difficult than the last, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing her now. He had to finish. He had to succeed. His hands were raw, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his mind was sharp. Daniel knew he couldn't give up. There was no other choice. With one last push, he managed to move the final obstacle, and with a breath of relief, the mother dog was freed from the pile of branches that had trapped her. Her body sagged slightly, her legs weak beneath her, but she was free. Daniel immediately checked her breathing, his fingers pressed gently against her side. The cold air bit at his exposed skin, but he didn't feel it. All he could feel was the soft, shallow breath beneath his fingers, a reminder that she was still with him. He let out a quiet sigh of relief. But the job wasn't finished yet. The forest was still dark, and he had to get her out of here. He couldn't wait any longer. Daniel shifted his hold, careful to support her as best as he could. She was frail, and her body seemed to weigh twice as much in his arms, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let her down, not now. As Daniel carefully adjusted his grip on the mother dog, the night seemed to fall around them like a heavy blanket. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy, and the forest grew darker with each passing minute. The once familiar path now felt like an endless maze, the trees closing in on them, casting eerie shadows across the ground. The air was damp and heavy, thick with the scent of earth and moss, and the only sounds were the soft rustling of the leaves and the occasional distant howl of the wind. Daniel felt the cold creeping in his breath, visible in the air, but it was the weight of the situation that made his heart heavy. He had freed the mother dog, but the hardest part was still ahead. They were deep in the forest, miles from any help, and the urgency in his chest told him there was no time to waste. The puppy remained close by, trotting alongside them, its tiny paws scurrying across the uneven ground, never leaving its mother's side. It was a small but constant reminder that there was no turning back. The little dog's determination was unwavering, just like Daniel's. Every step he took felt like an effort, his muscles burning from exhaustion. The weight of the mother dog was becoming unbearable, and the closer he got to the edge of the woods, the harder it became to move forward. Her body was frail, too weak to support her own weight, and her breathing was becoming more labored with each passing second. Daniel knew she couldn't last much longer without help. The forest felt endless, the trees seeming to stretch on forever, casting deep shadows that made it hard to see where the next step would lead. Daniel's eyes were straining, his mind racing as he searched for the familiar outline of the path back to his patrol car. But all that surrounded him were trees and thick underbrush. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves, and Daniel's heart pounded as he forced himself to focus. He glanced down at the puppy, who was still close by its small body, darting back and forth in an almost frantic dance. The little dog's eyes were bright with determination, and its movements were purposeful, as though it understood that time was running out. Each step it took seemed to push Daniel forward, urging him to keep going, not to give up now. The air grew colder as the night deepened, and Daniel's breath came faster. The wind howled again, making the already challenging path even harder to navigate. The branches of the trees seemed to reach out, entangling themselves in his clothes, adding to the already growing fatigue. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Despite the weight of the mother dog, the pain in his limbs, and the chill of the night air, Daniel pressed on. The path felt like it was closing in on him, but he refused to slow down. The puppy's persistent cries urged him forward, and the weight of the mother dog in his arms reminded him of the lives at stake. The path ahead seemed endless, the forest stretching farther than Daniel had imagined. The weight of the mother dog in his arms felt heavier with every step, the strain in his muscles becoming unbearable. His body was exhausted, each movement a painful reminder of how far they had already traveled and how much further they still needed to go. But there was no turning back now. The mother dog's breathing was still labored, but there was a slight improvement. She was no longer completely limp in his arms. She was conscious, though barely, and Daniel could feel her weight shift slightly as she shifted in his grasp. She wasn't giving up, and that fueled Daniel's determination. But with each step, time felt like it was running out. The night seemed to stretch forever, and the wind was biting cold against his skin, yet he couldn't allow himself to stop. He had to keep going. The puppy was still at his side, its tiny body darting ahead, then coming back as if it was trying to keep him moving. The little dog's energy, though small, was an unspoken call for him to keep pushing forward. Its eyes never left its mother, following every move, watching as Daniel struggled to keep up with the task at hand. As the minutes passed, Daniel could feel his legs burning, the exhaustion starting to take its toll. The weight of the mother dog seemed to increase with every step he took, her body too weak to support itself. Daniel's back ached from the strain of carrying her, and his arms felt as though they were ready to give out. But still he refused to stop. The puppy continued its path, and the silence of the forest, which had once seemed calming, now felt oppressive. He pushed through the thick underbrush, knowing the exit was close, but the slow pace of the mother dog was starting to become a challenge. She couldn't walk fast. Her legs were too weak. Daniel had to adjust his hold, cradling her more carefully, making sure she wasn't jostled too much. It was clear she was fighting every step, her body trembling in his arms. The puppy's persistence only reminded him of how close they were, and Daniel's heart clenched with the thought of losing any of them. The wind howled again, brushing against his skin like icy fingers, but Daniel didn't falter. He could hear the sound of his boots crunching over the gravel path, and it gave him a small sense of accomplishment. They were getting closer. But despite the progress, the fatigue began to take its toll. His legs felt like lead. His breath came in shallow gasps, and the weight of the mother dog seemed to increase by the minute. His arms ached, his shoulders screamed for relief, but Daniel kept moving, kept pushing forward. The thought of failure was not an option. His thoughts swirled around him, but the one thing that remained clear was the urgency of the situation. The mother dog needed help, and time was slipping away. He couldn't stop now. As they reached the edge of the forest, Daniel's heart began to slow, the glimmer of hope slowly returning to his chest. The path ahead opened up, but the way forward was still unclear. He had to get her to safety, quickly. There was still so much left to do, but at least now they were out of the woods. The forest gradually gave way to an open road, but the comfort of a clear path was fleeting. The moonlight cast a pale glow on the road ahead, and the cold air cut through Daniel's clothing like a blade. The gravel path stretched endlessly in front of him, the quiet emptiness amplifying the sound of his boots crunching against the stones. His breath was shallow, his chest tight, but the rhythmic sound of his footsteps offered a small sense of accomplishment. They had made it out of the woods, but the journey was far from over. Daniel shifted the weight of the mother dog in his arms, trying to find a better hold. Her body was still limp, but she was breathing. That was all that mattered. The path ahead seemed endless, a long stretch of empty road. The silence of the night pressed down on him, and as the cold wind whipped past, he realized just how isolated he was. It was as if the world around him had fallen away, leaving just him, the injured dog, and the little puppy that trotted at his side, never straying too far from its mother. The puppy's presence, though small, was a constant reminder of the responsibility Daniel felt. He wasn't just carrying the mother dog, he was carrying the lives of both of them, relying on his strength to get them both to safety. But as his legs began to feel like they were made of stone, Daniel found himself growing more and more fatigued. His muscles burned with exhaustion, each step taking more effort than the last. The wind cut through him, the chill seeping into his bones. The road, once a hopeful sign of escape, now felt like an endless stretch of isolation. His body was drained, his limbs sore, and the weight of the dog in his arms seemed to grow with every step. He felt as though he was walking through a fog, the path ahead unclear, his progress uncertain. Yet despite the pain, despite the overwhelming fatigue, Daniel kept going. He couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. He had made a promise. To the puppy, to the mother dog, to himself, that he would see this through. He couldn't fail them now. With each step, his mind wavered between hope and despair. He felt the warmth of hope every time he heard the faint sound of the puppy's tiny paws pattering behind him, but with every labored breath from the mother dog, a pang of fear gnawed at his insides. She was weakening, and he knew the clock was ticking. Daniel's steps slowed, his body screaming for rest, but the urgency of the situation pushed him forward. They were so close, yet the end of the road seemed farther than ever. The streetlights flickered in the distance, but still the distance seemed vast, the path uncertain. He could almost reach them, the place where he could get them help. But the journey was taking everything he had. Daniel's body felt like it was made of lead. Every step was a battle, each one heavier than the last. His mind was starting to blur, his exhaustion taking its toll. The cold wind continued to cut through his uniform, but it was the weight of the mother dog in his arms that was the real struggle. Her breathing was shallow now, weaker than it had been before. The puppy, still trotting by his side, kept glancing up at him, its small form a flickering light in the dark urging him on. The distant streetlights flickered like a beacon, but the path ahead seemed endless, the road stretching on before him with no end in sight. His hands, raw and trembling, tightened around the mother dog's fragile body, his fingers desperate to keep her close. Time was running out, he knew that. The puppy's tiny barks echoed through the night, but they did little to drown out the gnawing fear in his gut. She couldn't wait much longer. His steps slowed as the reality of the situation hit him. He couldn't carry her forever. He was too tired and she was too weak. He could feel the mother dog's body slipping, her frailty a stark reminder of how fragile life truly was. His heart raced as his mind flashed to the fact that he was alone. There was no one else here, no one to help. Daniel's gaze shifted back to the puppy, its eyes wide and filled with fear, but also an unwavering trust. It had been so brave leading him through the forest, never giving up. But now they needed help, and fast. With a deep, trembling breath, Daniel pulled out his radio from his duty belt, his fingers stiff and shaking. He tried to steady his voice as he pressed the button, sending out a distress call. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniel. I've got an injured dog here, a German Shepherd in critical condition. I need immediate assistance, over." The static buzzed for a moment, the response taking longer than usual. The urgency in Daniel's chest grew, but he forced himself to wait. His eyes kept drifting to the mother dog, her breathing now erratic. She was so close, but so far from safety. A voice crackled through the radio, distant and calm. 10-4. Officer Daniel. We've alerted animal rescue. Estimated arrival time 30 minutes. Over. 30 minutes, Daniel's voice broke through the static. She won't make it that long. I need help now. The dispatcher's voice wavered. Understood, officer. Please hold tight. Help is on the way. Daniel's pulse raced as he clicked off the radio. 30 minutes. That was an eternity. The mother dog was already too weak, and time was slipping away faster than he could move. He felt helpless, his eyes scanning the path ahead, willing something, anything, to appear in the distance. But the road was empty, and the seconds seemed to stretch on for longer than they should. His heart was heavy with the realization that the situation had become dire. His legs burned with exhaustion, but it wasn't his body that worried him. It was the fact that the mother dog's life was slipping away with every passing second. The seconds felt like minutes, and the minutes felt like hours as Daniel trudged down the road, the mother dog still weak in his arms. The wind had not let up its icy breath cutting through his clothes, but nothing felt colder than the fear of losing her. The puppy continued to stay close, its tiny body bouncing around Daniel's feet, looking up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. But as the mother dog's breathing became more shallow, Daniel's hope began to fade. Then, just when he thought he couldn't move any further, The distant sound of sirens reached his ears. It started as a faint hum, barely perceptible against the night stillness, but as the sound grew louder, Daniel felt the tiniest flicker of relief. His chest tightened in response. Help was coming. Through the fog of exhaustion, Daniel's eyes lifted to the road ahead. In the distance, the flashing lights of an emergency vehicle broke through the dark, casting bright, chaotic glows against the surrounding trees. Animal rescue had arrived. When the vehicle pulled up beside him, a team of veterinary professionals rushed out, their expressions a mixture of urgency and focused calm. Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest as they approached him, but it was quickly replaced by the tight knot of anxiety. He carefully passed the mother dog into their hands, her body frail and trembling. The lead vet, a woman with short dark hair, immediately knelt beside the dog. She checked her pulse carefully, listening to her breaths and assessing her condition with practiced efficiency. Daniel, standing back for the first time in what felt like hours, couldn't help but watch every move, his heart still in his throat. The puppy, still restless, nudged its mother gently with its nose as if it understood the severity of the situation. The vet looked up at Daniel with a nod, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a small glimmer of hope sparked inside him. She's in critical condition, but we'll do everything we can. We're not giving up on her. Daniel felt something warm spread through him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time he knew they had a chance. The vet and her team quickly went to work. They moved the mother dog onto a gurney and immediately started administering fluids, checking for internal injuries and stabilizing her condition. The puppy, ever devoted, remained by her side, its eyes following every movement, its small body trembling with anxiety. Daniel knelt down next to the puppy, gently placing his hand on its back, offering the only comfort he could. As the medical team worked, Daniel could feel the bond between him and these two animals grow stronger. They weren't just victims of circumstance anymore. They had become a part of him and he of them. Every step of this journey had intertwined their fates, and now he couldn't imagine walking away. The following days were filled with constant visits to the veterinary clinic. Daniel was there at every opportunity, sitting in the small waiting room, his mind always occupied with thoughts of the mother dog and the puppy. The staff worked tirelessly to stabilize the mother dog, their dedication providing a sense of hope that Daniel hadn't allowed himself to feel before. The long, exhausting hours of uncertainty had begun to feel like a distant memory, replaced by a quiet optimism that kept him going. The mother dog's condition improved slowly but steadily. She was still in critical condition, but the signs of life were more pronounced. Her breathing had become less labored, and though she was still fragile, there was a slight spark of resilience in her eyes whenever Daniel came to visit. Every time he entered the clinic, the sight of her faintly wagging tail gave him a renewed sense of purpose. She was fighting, and so was he. Daniel found himself visiting the clinic every chance he got. His job was never far from his mind, but the pull to be there to see them through this was stronger than anything else. The mother dog, though still far from fully healed, had begun to show signs of trust. She would calm when Daniel sat beside her, and even though she was still too weak to move much, her eyes would soften when he spoke to her in a quiet, reassuring voice. The puppy, ever loyal, followed Daniel around the clinic, always close by, its tiny body full of energy despite the hardships it had already endured. Daniel often found the little dog curled up next to its mother, offering comfort in the way only a devoted animal could. He couldn't help but smile every time he saw them together. There was a bond between them, undeniable and pure, and Daniel was now a part of that bond, a part of their family. The more time Daniel spent with them, the deeper the connection grew. The puppy had become attached to him in a way that was both heartwarming and humbling. It followed him wherever he went, sitting at his feet during visits, its little eyes constantly watching him. Daniel couldn't deny the affection he felt for the pup. It was as if he were becoming the protector it needed, not just for the puppy, but for both of them. Even though the puppy still had moments of anxiety, especially when it had to be separated from its mother for treatment, Daniel was always there to calm it, speaking softly and holding it close. Every interaction, every gesture of care seemed to strengthen their bond, and Daniel couldn't help but feel like he had found something he hadn't realized he was missing. As the days passed, the mother dog's health began to improve significantly. She was still weak, but she had started to eat again, her eyes growing brighter with each passing day. She would occasionally try to stand her legs trembling beneath her, but Daniel would always be there to offer support, never letting her fall. And as the puppy grew stronger alongside her, Daniel realized just how far they had come. As the weeks went by, Daniel began to realize just how much his life had changed. It wasn't just about the rescue anymore. It wasn't just about the mother dog and her puppy being saved from a dire fate. It had become something far deeper, something he had never expected when he first set out that fateful night. He was no longer just the rescuer. He had become a protector, a caregiver, a member of their small but growing family. The days of uncertainty and fear were behind them, replaced with a newfound sense of security, but Daniel could not shake the feeling that his role in their lives had shifted. The mother dog's recovery was still ongoing, but her improvement was noticeable with each passing day. Her fur had started to regain its luster, and her once weak body had begun to build strength. Though she was still cautious and didn't venture far, her steps were steadier, and she would walk short distances around the clinic with Daniel by her side. He knew the road ahead would still require patience, but seeing her walk again, even if slowly, was a victory in itself. The puppy had grown stronger too. It had gained weight, its tiny frame now full of energy, bounding around like any healthy pup would. It had stopped looking over its shoulder in worry, and its eyes had softened from the early signs of fear and anxiety. The bond between Daniel and the puppy had also deepened. It was no longer just a frightened animal looking for comfort. It had grown into a companion. It would follow him everywhere, curling up at his feet when he worked and sitting beside him during quiet moments as if content simply to be near him. Daniel found himself laughing at the small joys, the way the puppy would chase after a stick, or the way the mother dog would let out a soft bark as if calling out to him for attention. These little moments of happiness, so simple yet so meaningful, had filled the void he hadn't realized was there. He had always been an independent man focused on his work, his duty as a police officer. He had never given much thought to what it meant to have a family, but now with the mother, dog, and puppy by his side, something inside him had shifted. His life had taken a turn he couldn't have anticipated, and in doing so, it had filled a part of him he hadn't known was missing. He was no longer alone. The routine had changed. His days now included visits to the veterinary clinic where he would help with the dog's continued care or simply sit with them, offering comfort as they healed. At night, he would return home to find the puppy waiting at the door, tail wagging, eyes full of love. The house no longer felt empty. It felt full of life, full of hope. But with this new life came a new set of responsibilities. Daniel knew that the journey ahead would not always be easy. There would be days when the recovery process was slower than he wanted, when the puppy's energy would wear him out, and when the challenges of being a guardian would weigh heavily on him. But even in those moments, he couldn't help but feel that he had found something worth fighting for. Daniel had expected that taking care of the mother dog and the puppy would be an adjustment. He had thought that after everything they had been through, life would be easier now that they were all safe. But the truth was, it wasn't that simple. The reality of their new life together quickly became clear. While the mother dog was steadily recovering, there were still challenges. Her body, though stronger, remained fragile, and the puppy's endless energy was both a joy and a challenge. Daniel had never been one to shy away from responsibility, but caring for two animals that needed constant attention was demanding. His days were no longer solely filled with police work. They were now intertwined with the task of ensuring the well-being of his new family. Some mornings were easier than others. The mother dog, although much better still, had moments of weakness. She couldn't go for long walks yet, and at times she would stumble on her own legs, her movements slow and careful. Daniel had to watch over her carefully, making sure she didn't push herself too hard. It was a constant reminder that he had to be patient. Healing didn't happen overnight, and he knew that. But it wasn't just the mother dog's recovery that required his attention. The puppy, full of energy and curiosity, had a tendency to get into trouble. It loved to run around, chase after leaves, or nibble on anything it could find. While it was adorable to watch, it was also exhausting. Daniel would often find himself running after the little one, trying to keep it from knocking things over or chewing on things that weren't toys. There were mornings when he felt completely drained, his patience tested by the endless activity of the puppy. Yet amidst the challenges, there were moments of joy that made it all worthwhile. The mother dog's gentle tail wags when Daniel sat beside her, the puppy's joyful barks as it played with its toys. These small moments made all the difficulties fade into the background. Daniel found himself laughing more often, his heart swelling with love for the little family he had taken in. One particular afternoon, as Daniel sat in his living room, the puppy curled up next to him on the couch and the mother dog rested peacefully nearby. He couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. These were the moments that made everything worth it. As much as the responsibilities of their care weighed on him, these quiet, simple moments of peace filled him with a deep, quiet joy. The bond between the three of them grew stronger every day. Daniel could see the trust in the puppy's eyes and feel it in the mother dog's gentle nuzzles when he offered comfort. They were a family now. As the days went by, Daniel began to feel a subtle shift in his life. The moments of exhaustion, frustration, and fatigue were still present, but they no longer overwhelmed him. He had found something he never realized: he needed a family. The presence of the mother dog and the puppy in his life had filled a void he hadn't even known existed. He had always prided himself on his independence. His job, his responsibilities, and his solitude had been enough for him. But now, with them by his side, he realized how much more there was to life. The small daily rituals, feeding them in the morning, taking short walks in the evening, or simply sitting together in the quiet of his home, had become a source of comfort. It wasn't just the act of caring for them that had brought him peace, but the quiet companionship they offered. Daniel no longer felt alone. His home was filled with life, with the soft sounds of the puppy's paws pattering across the floor and the gentle rustling of the mother dog's movements as she rested nearby. Every time he returned home after a long day, the puppy would bound over to greet him, its tail wagging with boundless excitement. The mother dog, now fully recovered, would nuzzle him gently, her once weak body now strong and steady. The love and trust in their eyes filled his heart, making all the hard days worth it. Daniel could feel the bond between them growing stronger every day. The puppy's loyalty was unwavering, and the mother dog's gratitude was evident in every tender nudge and soft sigh. They weren't just pets to him anymore. They were family. And with them, Daniel had discovered what it meant to have someone to care for, someone to love, and someone who relied on him just as much as he relied on them. As he watched the puppy grow stronger, more playful, and more attached to him, Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The little dog had brought so much joy into his life, and with each passing day their relationship deepened. The once persistent anxiety in the puppy's eyes had now been replaced by trust, and Daniel knew he had become the protector the puppy needed. The mother dog, on the other hand, had become a quiet source of strength in his life. Her steady presence, her loyalty, and her resilience had inspired Daniel in ways he hadn't expected. She had fought through so much, and now, seeing her happily resting at his side, Daniel felt a deep appreciation for her strength and the bond they shared. Every day, Daniel realized more and more that family wasn't just about blood or shared history. It was about loyalty, love, and the commitment to stand by each other through the good times and the bad. The challenges of caring for them, the moments of doubt, the exhaustion, had all been worth it. He wasn't just looking after them, they were looking after him too. Daniel stood by the window watching the soft light of dawn filter through the blinds. The world outside was waking up, but inside there was a quiet peace. The house, once empty and silent, now felt full of life, full of hope, and full of the love he had never known he needed. The mother dog was lying on her favorite spot in the living room, her body still, but her presence as comforting as ever. The puppy was curled up next to her, the two of them intertwined in an embrace that spoke of trust and devotion. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like he had found what truly mattered. They were a family, not just because they had been brought together by circumstances, but because they had chosen each other. The bond between him, the mother dog, and the puppy was stronger than anything Daniel had experienced before. It was a bond that didn't require words, just the simple act of being together. through the quiet moments, through the trials, and through the love they shared. He walked over to the couch and sat down the puppy, immediately hopping up beside him, its tiny paws eagerly jumping into his lap. The mother dog raised her head slowly and looked at him, her eyes soft but full of gratitude. Daniel reached out gently, scratching the puppy's ears while the mother dog nudged him with her nose as if to say thank you. In that moment, Daniel realized that the love and loyalty they had given him had not only healed their wounds but had healed his own heart too. The puppy, now growing stronger with each passing day, had become his constant companion, following him everywhere, bringing him endless moments of joy. But it was the mother dog with her quiet strength and unwavering resilience that had taught him the most. She had shown him the power of perseverance, the strength of unconditional love, and the importance of trust. Daniel had saved them, but in return they had saved him in ways he couldn't have imagined. He looked at the two of them lying peacefully in the warmth of the living room, and for the first time in a long while he felt at home. There was no doubt in his mind that they were meant to be together, meant to walk through life side by side. Their journey from the moment they had met had been one of survival, but also one of healing. And now as they settled into this new life, Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. The love he had found in this little family was something that couldn't be explained. It was simply a miracle. In their eyes, Daniel saw more than just animals in need of a home. He saw loyalty, courage, and an unconditional bond that transcended everything else. Daniel leaned back, the puppy curling into his chest, and sighed in contentment. This was his family now, and nothing else mattered. Through the trials, through the hardships, they had come together, and that was enough. As we reflect on Daniel's journey with the mother dog and her puppy, we are reminded of the powerful and unconditional love animals can offer. The story of the German Shepherds is not just one of survival, it is a testament to the deep bond that can exist between humans and animals. The loyalty, courage, and devotion shown by the mother dog and the playful energy of the puppy are symbols of the positive impact animals have on our lives. Through this journey, Daniel learned that true family goes beyond blood. It's about the connections we build and the love we share. The mother dog and puppy not only healed from their injuries, but they also healed Daniel, teaching him the meaning of patience, resilience, and the beauty of unconditional love. Animals, particularly German Shepherds, have the ability to inspire us to be better, kinder versions of ourselves. This story emphasizes the importance of rescuing and caring for animals, as well as the deep responsibility we have in caring for those who rely on us. It also reminds us that love and loyalty are not bound by species. Just like Daniel and the dogs, we can all create meaningful connections that bring light into our lives. In the end, the journey wasn't just about saving lives, it was about understanding the true meaning of family, the power of love, and the strength we find when we choose to care for one another, whether human or animal. This is the real miracle, the love that transforms, the loyalty that endures, and the bond that never fades.